What's up, guys? Today we're going to take a look at the movie The Social Dilemma. This is a docudrama released on Netflix last year. It kind of goes over machine learning and AI and kind of what the consequences for using these tools on social media platforms are for kind of the users and how that influences people's behavior and kind of society. So let's take a look. Let's see what it's all about. Let's get into it.
I was the president of Pinterest. Before that, I was the director of monetization at Facebook for 5 years.
While at Twitter, I spent a number of years running their developer platform and then became head of consumer product.
I was the co-inventor of Google Drive, Gmail Chat, Facebook Pages, and the Facebook like button.
Wow, these guys have insane resumes, and they're all they look like they're 35, maybe. It's pretty nuts to think that there's just this handful of people, a small group of people, that design most of what we see on the internet on a daily basis.
They sell certainty. In order to be successful in that business, you have to have great predictions. Great predictions begin with one imperative. You need a lot of data.
So I actually think this is kind of a misconception. You don't need big data to build models, right? And you don't need big data to do data science. There's a lot of problems, especially in business or government, where you really only have maybe a few hundred records, a few thousand records, and you don't need kind of the latest, greatest neural networks, deep learning, kind of these, popular machine learning buzzwords to build models that deliver kind of business value, right? This is especially true in a lot of settings where actually statistical models will outperform the state-of-the-art machine learning models. Things like customers over time, or observations, kind of, let's say, customer sales over a period of time. You actually need things like hierarchical Bayesian models to analyze this kind of data accurately, and they'll actually outperform machine learning models of that task. So don't get caught up on this idea that you need big data to do data science. I don't think that's true. And there's a lot of statistical methods out there that you can get started with, even if you're working on kind of a small data environment.
We now have markets that trade in human futures at scale. And those markets have produced the trillions of dollars that have made the internet companies the richest companies in the history of humanity.
All right. I'm not really sure what she's talking about with human futures, but the idea that these tech companies that we have today, like, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, are bigger than anything we've ever seen in history is not exactly true. So it's a big problem, and we need to think about how these companies are impacting society, but I don't think we need to blow it out of proportion like this.
What I want people to know is that everything they're doing online is being watched, is being tracked, is being measured. Every single action you take is carefully monitored and recorded. Exactly what image you stop and look at, for how long you look at it. Oh yeah, seriously, for how long you look at it.
This is actually true. Data storage today is extremely cheap. A lot of companies just store everything that they get from interactions with their users or customers or whatever it happens to be. Just store it, work it out later. Storage is cheap, so there's no worry about, well, should we have all of our interactions because, maybe on the back end, the server cost, it's not an issue anymore. So it really is true when you're using these platforms that every interaction is recorded. And it's not just tech companies that do this. Grocery stores do it when you pay with your rewards card. Everything is recorded in databases nowadays. Something to think about.
And so all of this data that we're just pouring out all the time is being fed into these systems that have almost no human supervision and that are making better and better and better and better predictions about what we're going to do and who we are.
Yeah, so I think this really gets to the core of the issue. Machine learning tools are built to optimize an objective like accuracy. And so as they get trained and have more and more data input into them, they're really only going for classification accuracy or kind of minimizing error, but they're not really thinking about kind of the bigger picture, right? And so what he's talking about, and that these are largely unsupervised, is that people set up the tools to say, hey, I need a kind of recommender system that does really good at recommending things, and the objective is maybe YouTube watch time, right? But the objective is not necessarily, is this good for people? So to the extent that people really just monitor these systems in terms of their predictive accuracy or performance, they're really largely being unsupervised in terms of goals that we might think are important as a society. Yeah, so this quote here, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, is super overused in data science. Slideshows, presentations, articles. The other one is the quote from George Box that says kind of all models are wrong and some are useful. Like, listen, we get it, stop.
After all the testing, all the iterating, all of this stuff, you know what the single biggest thing we realized? Get any individual to 7 friends in 10 days. That was it.
Chamath was the head of growth at Facebook early on, and he's very well known in the tech industry for pioneering a lot of the growth tactics that were used to grow Facebook at incredible speed. And those growth tactics had then become the sort of standard playbook for Silicon Valley. They were used at Uber, and they've been used at a bunch of other companies. One of the things that he pioneered was the use of scientific A/B testing of small feature changes. Companies like Google and Facebook would roll out lots of little tiny experiments they were constantly doing on users. And over time, by running these constant experiments, you develop the most optimal way to get users to do what you want them to do. It's manipulation.
Okay, so what he's talking about here is called A/B testing. This is a kind of randomized control trial where we have 2 groups of users, one which we're going to call the control group, and one is the treatment group. The control group gets the normal version of the website or the service, and the treatment group gets the slightly modified version of the website or the service. And we want to compare, does this modified version increase time spent on the site or dollars spent, something like that. And since the control and treatment are randomly assigned, then we don't have to worry about adjusting statistically for differences between the groups.
There has been a gigantic increase in depression and anxiety for American teenagers, which began right around between 2011 and 2013. The number of teenage girls out of 100,000 in this country who were admitted to a hospital every year because they cut themselves or otherwise harmed themselves. That number was pretty stable until around 2010, 2011, and then it begins going way up. It's up 62% for older teen girls. It's up 189% for the preteen girls. That's nearly triple. Even more horrifying, we see the same pattern with suicide. The older teen girls, 15 to 19 years old, they're up 70% compared to the first decade of the century. The preteen girls, who have very low rates to begin with, they are up 151%. And that pattern points to social media.
So this is actually an example of an observational study, as opposed to the A/B testing we were just talking about. In an observational study, you don't actually control the experiment, right? You don't get to control which group of people is treatment or control. You just have to look at the data that you have and try to estimate a causal effect. This is super hard. It's a huge area of statistics. Causal analysis is a lot of careful theory and regression models. You have to control for a lot of different kinds of variables. And even if you do a really careful analysis, a lot of people can still disagree with your analysis, and it's totally reasonable because you might have left out a covariate, you might have some piece of theory that is new or they think is relevant and you don't think is relevant. It's really hard to do this kind of statistics well.
Do genetic engineering and develop new kinds of human beings in the future, but realistically speaking, you're living inside of hardware, a brain, that was like millions of years old. And then there's this screen, and then on the opposite side of the screen, there's these thousands of engineers and supercomputers that have goals that are different than your goals. And so who's going to win in that game? Who's going to win?
Yeah, so here I don't know that I agree that using machine learning tools to influence people's behavior is a totally new class of problem. We've had marketing, hype machines, just straight propaganda for years, way before technology companies, and they all kind of have a similar goal of persuasion. The difference here is that machine learning tools are really efficient, but they're still just tools. I don't really like the way the movie is kind of framing machine learning and engineers at big tech companies as being unbeatable and totally new, and that we have no tools if we disagree with the way they're conducting their business to go ahead and either regulate or modify how that business is being conducted. Because I think at the end of the day, they're businesses, and we've seen this kind of stuff before.
Even talking about an AI is just a metaphor. At these companies like Google, there's just massive rooms. Some of them underground, some of them underwater, of just computers.
So I think this is important to keep in mind. Machine learning tools are just programs that run on computers. They're not generally intelligent. They're not like people. They're tools that perform a specific task. So for example, in the case of facial recognition, a machine learning tool will really just take data about faces and use that to label new faces. It doesn't learn anything else. You can't take that same tool and use it to predict the weather. All it can do is faces. It's not going to become intelligent. It's not going to become smarter than like you or me. And so I think it really helps to put it into context of what we're talking about here. These are programs that run on computers that are used by businesses. That's all there is to it.
I like to say that algorithms are opinions embedded in code, and that algorithms are not objective.
I think that she's making a good point here. Machine learning tools are built with an optimization goal in mind, right? Like they optimize accuracy, they minimize error, something like that, some fairly simple mathematical goal. But the tool itself is built and used by a person, and that person has an opinion about how the tool should be used and what the purpose of the tool is. And we need to keep in mind that the opinions of the person are kind of reflected in the tool's use.
You can imagine these things are sort of like they tilt the floor of human behavior. They make some behavior harder and some easier. And you're always free to walk up the hill, but fewer people do. And so at scale, at society scale, you really are just tilting the floor and changing what billions of people think and do.
Yeah, I think this is actually a really good summary of what the movie's about in general. These tools are really efficient. They help people make quick and accurate decisions and predictions. What really matters is how they're used, how these companies use these algorithms to influence behavior, and what that means for society at large is really what we need to be thinking about. Well, there you have it. That's my reaction to The Social Dilemma. Overall, I think this movie does a good job of introducing us to tech companies and machine learning and how these tools are being used to influence people's behavior on social media platforms. I would say my only criticism is that sometimes they make machine learning out to be a little bit bigger than it is. I think it's important to keep in mind that these tools are really just computer programs, and how they're being used is totally under our control. These businesses have a certain business model that make use of these tools, but it's really up to us as a society to decide whether or not we think that these tools are being used appropriately. So let me know what you think. Do you agree? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe. See you next time.